So when we're finding a limit as x approaches infinity or negative infinity, there are some rules that we follow in finding those limits. And one of the rules says that if you have that your numerator has a larger power than your denominator, then you know that it is approaching infinity. Well, the question is it approaching infinity or negative infinity? And so we have to specify how to do that with some examples here so that you know which way to go with it. So let's do, let's first of all take an example here. Let's do the limit as x approaches infinity of negative 5x cubed all over, let's say 4x squared minus 3. Okay, so as we go through this, we're plugging in infinity in for x is kind of the way that you're thinking about it, but we do know because the top is larger than the bottom as far as the exponent, that it is approaching infinity or negative infinity. So the first thing we need to do is we're plugging in a positive infinity here. So when you cube a positive value, it is still positive. When you square a positive value, when you're plugging it in there, it's still a positive value. And that's important to know just as we go through. So this, if you plug in this positive here, then this will be positive. And if you plug it in here, it'll still be positive. Now notice we still have this negative outside here. Okay, so because of that negative, you will have this whole value will just equal infinity. Okay, so let's look at another example where it's a little different. I'm sorry, because of that, it will be negative infinity. My bad. So here, this negative, because everything in here is positive, will then be a negative infinity. Okay, so let's take that same example and see what happens if we were going to negative infinity. So let's do negative 5x cubed all over 4x squared minus 3. Okay, so as we plug in each of these values, we're plugging in that negative infinity. So if you plug in a negative infinity here, so this is what you're plugging in. When you cube a negative value, it is still negative. Okay? When you square a negative value, it will become positive. And this is what the negative value I'm talking about is the value of x that you're plugging in. And then you have still this negative out in front. So we have a negative times a negative. So this would give us a positive infinity. So as you're going through that, you have to pay attention to those signs to know if it's positive or negative infinity. Let's do one more example of this. Let's just take the limit as x approaches negative infinity of, let's say, 6x to the 4th all over 5x cubed plus 8. Okay, so as you're plugging in this negative infinity, first of all, if you plug in a negative infinity, it's a negative value, but when you take it to the 4th power, when that power is positive, no matter what you put in there, it'll become positive. So this value is positive. The negative, you're plugging into this third, but because it's only 3 times, it's a negative times a negative is a positive, times another negative gives you a negative value. And then there's no negatives out here, but we do know because of that this would be a negative infinity. Now, why is it just infinity? Why do we know that also? Is because the numerator is larger, the power of the numerator is larger than the power of the denominator.